My name's Lance Orton, as you mentioned, and let me start with a few pretentious titles that I have: Executive Director of CityTeam Portland and former award grant recipient from Hope for the Homeless. I also am the Vice President of the board at the Central East Side Together, which is the Enhanced Services District that oversees the Central East Side livability and safety issues in the neighborhood that CityTeam has operated for 25 years. And then one more pretentious title. I serve on the board for Shelter Portland, which is our new mayor-elect, Keith Wilson's organization that he created while running for mayor that is geared to ending unsheltered homelessness here in Portland. I'm also a person in long-term recovery, and that's what I want to focus on here today, because that is the accolade that I am most proud of. It is the one that I identify most with in my identity. And it is the one thing that has given me the most reward in my life. And I think back to my high school days. I went to a very prestigious Catholic prep school in San Francisco, and I remember all the things that I wanted to be when I grew up. A person I'll just say it, a heroin addict was not one of them. I wanted to be an Silicon Valley executive, just like my dad. I wanted to be a family man. I wanted to make a lot of money. And I wanted a beautiful wife. Those were my aspirations. And through a series of trauma events, one, losing my dad to a tragic accident, that death spun me into about a 10-year cycle of going through rock bottoms that got lower and lower and lower. And by the time I was 42, I was completely addicted to heroin started as a pain pill addiction. And that addiction, if I really had to look at what caused it, between the trauma and the events, it was loneliness. It was really loneliness. I was so isolated towards the end of my addiction that I didn't want to live. And there's a handful of you in the room that know me. I am naturally an optimist and have a real zeal for life. I always have. In the last few days of my addiction, I was living in the back of my Jeep in a Walmart parking lot right here in Troutdale, and I wanted to die. I was considering suicide. And for those of you that don't know the power of addiction, the power of being dependent on a substance for your life, it sucks everything away from your life, and it's the only thing that matters. I needed it to survive, and I didn't want to live anymore. And so 2018, I aged myself, 43 in 2018. I was living in the back of that Jeep, and a miraculous thing happened. I had all the problems in the world that you could imagine that come with addiction. I had a college degree. I also had warrants for my arrest. I had drug dealers that were after me, and I had no one else. My family had put up really tough boundaries, tough love, said, you know, my mom, I remember calling her that last week, begging her for more money, begging her for a motel room. And she said, no, Lance, you're 43 years old, figure this out. Call me when you have a year of sobriety. And I thought, sobriety? What is she talking about? The next thing that happened was nothing short of miraculous. One of those drug dealers that I owed money to showed up at my Jeep, had found me, and stole my Jeep at gunpoint. He made me drive the Jeep down a road somewhere in Portland, and I wasn't from Portland at this time. I had come from Bend, Oregon, mind you. And as he is having me drive, and this person, we'll just call him Crazy Cameron for the purposes of this story. He's not the kind of guy that you really want after you, especially when he has a gun in your hand. And he said, as I was driving, terrified, detoxing, withdrawing from heroin, in the worst state I've ever been, he said something incredibly funny. He said, Lance, don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. God told me, not this one. He has a plan for you, and you need to go to rehab. In the moment, none of this registered as anything more than completely psychotic. I need to get away from this individual as quickly as possible, and jump out of the car, roll down the hill, and run. But he didn't hurt me. I don't have time to go on the whole story, but he wound up driving away with my Jeep and left me unharmed. And I remember standing in a strange park somewhere in Portland, and there was a brief moment of serenity where I just realized this now I'm really homeless. This is the rock bottom that I'm not willing to go any lower. There was no one left in my life. I had no idea what the next step is. My ID, my phone, everything that showed that I existed, Social Security card, birth certificate, all in the glove box, drove away, and I'm standing in this park with the clothes on my back. And that serenity quickly passed into panic. I had some kind of panic attack. I woke up in the hospital at Kaiser Sunnyside. The doctor said, we don't know, you're okay, but you were found unconscious and you were brought here. And I remember thinking in that hospital bed, what am I going to do? I have nowhere to go and I can't stay here. So I milked the hospital system as long as possible, which is often what many of our homeless do in Portland, because I was terrified to go out to the street. I had never actually lived unsheltered. I had my Jeep, but I'd never lived unsheltered. And so after about 4 days of receiving fentanyl and pain pills in the hospital, which was ironic, the nurse finally said, we have to discharge you. They asked me where I could get a ride to, and I finally told someone for the first time I was homeless. And she looked at me, I'll never forget the look, and she says, okay, now that's a need. And so in came a social worker, I think I have it. That social worker, her name is Monica. I will never forget, she gave me one of these, which is a little voucher to the CityTeam shelter. And so I know you can't see this here, but there's a CityTeam logo on here. I have the actual one she gave me framed in my office, and I didn't want to bring it as fear that I would drop it and break it. But I do have that actual voucher. And so that led me to the CityTeam emergency shelter. She told me, this is going to be rough for you, by the way. And I remember thinking, what does she mean? And I had never been in a homeless shelter before. I quickly found out what she meant. It was rough. I showed up at Grand Avenue. There was a line of about 40 men experiencing homelessness, and I got in line and I went through the normal shelter process. And 3 days of going through the line, coming in, getting a meal, getting a shower, getting a mat to sleep on. And I look back at that experience, and it really was rough. It was humbling. It was the most humbling thing I had ever been through. It was so necessary for my kind of addiction and where I was in my life. I needed that humility to realize I don't know how to be a 43-year-old. I just don't know how to live this life. And so after about 3 days, I started to notice there was us in the population, the men experiencing homelessness, but there was another group of guys running around, kind of running the place. And they didn't look like you all, but they had nicer shoes and they had combed hair and they were kind of running the place. And I figured, all right, well, I should probably figure out who these guys are. And sure enough, one of them came up to me and said, hey, we've got this program here. You can live here for a year for free. We'll help you with your addiction. We'll help you get sober. And it's really cool. And all I heard was live here for free for a year. And I said, where do I sign? I signed up for the residential program. We call it Renew. And that year was an incredible year. I mean, I've experienced a lot of joy in my life. Prior to my dad, had an amazing upbringing. College was a blast for me at San Diego State. But the year I spent in the residential program at CityTeam, I have never had more joy in my life. And I think that's first of all because I started to build community. There were other men in this program that were different than me in many ways, but they all knew what it was like to have that pull of addiction in your life that you just could not escape alone. And so I started to build relationships with these men. I developed a relationship with God. I absolutely fell in love with God. Grew up agnostic, secular family, no church, none of that in my life. I met the living God in that program, and he filled my heart, and he still does every day. And thank you. That's worth a round of applause. And I heard a lot of, in these videos, that spiritual growth that we get. And that's exactly what it is. It's a relationship with God, whatever you call your God. It really, really changed my life. And it got me to look at the person that I was. And so as I graduated that program, when I left there, I had purpose, I had meaning, I had community. I had a job. One of the requirements at CityTeam Renew program is that you cannot graduate until you have a living wage job and $3,000 saved in the bank. And I thought, oh, that's pretty tough. What happens if you don't? Well, we hold you back. And I thought, that's brilliant. And so by the time I got out, I had a whole new life. And I look back at that experience, and it was all the pieces that led up to where I am today were so necessary. And today, to be able to lead the organization that saved my life is beyond an honor. It's not work. It's an absolute pleasure and a joy. Want me to keep going? I don't know how much time I have.
Well, thank you.
I gave him some questions, so if I got stuck like I am now, he's supposed to ask me these questions.
Yeah, Mr. Orton doesn't seem stuck at all. But, Lance, if you wouldn't mind just tying that then to how you ended up meeting the Marshalls, and then about... Yeah, that part.
Of course. Okay. So Doug and Carol Marshall popped into my life through a series of, one of the cool things about the videos that we saw here and that I'm just now realizing is that these holistic care organizations, as Doug and everyone calls them, we actually all work together. The organizations that are up tonight and that have received grants in the past, and we all collaborate and work together. We share men and women in our programs. We help each other so that, let's say a program for one person doesn't work, we never exit someone to the streets. We always call Shepherd's Door. We work with our new women and kids program, and we share clients so that there's always a pathway or a next step if it doesn't work out within our programs. And I think that's pretty cool that you're vetting all of the organizations that we work with. And so I met Doug at a networking event, and somebody said, hey, you should call Doug because they gave out money. And I was a very new executive director and new fundraiser, and I chased him out the door. And I said, so I was one of those that they did not pursue. I pursued Doug. And he said, well, there's a process, and give me a call. Let's go have coffee. And so I went through that process. And so I can tell you, I know what it's like to have the books opened up on your organization and being looked at with a microscope. And I remember he was going, well, we're going to find out what the cost is and your success rate. And I was really nervous. I'm like, oh, God, I mean, it worked for me. I don't know. So the process, and it turned out, we fit right in the center of the 4 that are up for tonight. And I really thought that the accountability and the thoroughness that he was looking at, he was so careful to make sure that the money that he was giving out is going to organizations that are actually creating lasting change. And so we received a $40,000 grant about a year or the year before. And for me at that moment, I was new in executive director role. CityTeam was in a massive growth phase. We were opening a women and kids program. We had just taken over Night Strike, which is our outreach event under the Burnside Bridge. And so when we were awarded that money, it was real. It could not have been at a better time. And so thank you, Doug and Carol, and the rest of the Hope for the Homeless Foundation.